To all the details surrounding that reunion between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle and the King.
The meeting began without Camilla, and that was the first sign this was no ordinary palace dispute. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, senior advisors were called into a private late-night briefing after an unexpected change to Camilla's schedule raised questions inside the royal family. Prince William arrived carrying a sealed folder, Princess, and was already waiting. King Charles was not present in the room, though private instructions had reportedly been passed to the advisors before the meeting began. No public announcement had been made. No title had been removed. And there was no verified decision to expel Camilla from the royal family. But something serious had clearly happened. One of Camilla's upcoming appearances had been quietly removed. Her office had been told not to issue an explanation, and palace staff were instructed to avoid discussing the meeting, even with other members of the household. William remained controlled. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse Camilla publicly. Instead, he placed a folder on the table and said that the family could no longer ignore what had been happening behind closed doors, and watched him carefully. She understood that William would not have called such a meeting over a personal disagreement. This involved trust, influence, and decisions that could affect the future of the monarchy. Then William opened the folder. The first document inside was not about Camilla's latest public appearance. It was not about a recent argument. It concerned a private decision made years earlier. And the moment and read the first line, she realized the family could no longer treat this as an ordinary internal dispute. William had remained silent for longer than anyone in the room realized. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, he had repeatedly chosen restraint because he understood what a public confrontation could do to King Charles. Charles had already endured years of scrutiny. Another family conflict could deepen the pressure around the monarchy and turn a private disagreement into a permanent national spectacle. For that reason, William had tolerated decisions he did not fully support. Changes in access, altered schedules, messages passed through offices instead of directly between family members. Each incident seemed small enough to ignore, until the pattern began affecting his own household. Catherine had urged caution. She did not want William accused of creating a power struggle. She reminded him that not every palace decision was part of a larger campaign. But William believed the latest development had crossed a different line. This was no longer about Camilla's personality. It was no longer about old family wounds. It was about trust, boundaries, and who had the right to make decisions affecting William, Catherine, and their children. Inside the meeting, William explained that silence had once protected Charles. Now he feared silence was protecting the wrong system, and asked him whether he was certain the documents showed deliberate interference. William admitted that one page could still be interpreted in more than one way, but then he removed a second document from a folder. Unlike the first, this one was recent. It referred to a new palace arrangement that William's office had never approved. And when and saw which members of the family were affected, the atmosphere in the room changed immediately. The second document described what appeared to be a routine administrative change. But William did not see it that way. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, Camilla's office had supported a new arrangement, giving selected palace advisors greater influence over family schedules, private briefings, and the public presentation of major royal appearances. On paper, it sounded efficient. In practice, William believed it allowed decisions affecting his household to be made without his approval. One upcoming family appearance had already been altered. The timing had changed. The guest list had been revised, and references to George, Charlotte, and Louis had reportedly been discussed before William and Catherine's team had been fully consulted. That was the point William could not ignore. Camilla's supporters insisted the change was procedural. They argued that the palace needed a more coordinated system as royal responsibilities expanded. But William saw something more serious. This was not about who stood where for a photograph. It was about who had the right to make decisions involving the future king's family. princess, and read the document carefully. Then she asked the question no one else had raised. Who had authorized the arrangement? The advisors exchanged uncertain looks. Some believed Charles had approved the general direction. Others insisted he had never seen the final version. That ambiguity made the situation worse. Because if Charles had approved it, William was challenging the king. But if he had not, someone inside the palace had exercised influence far beyond their authority. William then produced a message attached to the original plan. It appeared to show that the change had not been created in response to a recent problem. It had been discussed much earlier, and one line suggested the real objective was not simply efficiency. It was control over how William and Catherine would be presented before the next reign. The message was brief, but its wording changed the meaning of everything that had come before it. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, the document appeared to be an internal palace memorandum outlining how future royal appearances, public statements, and family visibility should be coordinated. It did not openly accuse William. It did not directly attack Catherine. And it did not mention removing anyone from the line of succession. Instead, it used careful administrative language. That was what made it more troubling. One passage suggested that decisions involving the Prince and Princess of Wales should be channeled through a central authority before being released publicly. Another referred to the need for consistent presentation during a period of transition. To some advisors, the phrases sounded routine. To William, they suggested that his office had been deliberately placed beneath another layer of control, and asked whether Camilla had personally written the message. No one could confirm that. The memorandum appeared to have come from advisors connected to her office, but its exact authorship remained unclear. That distinction mattered. Camilla was not in the room to explain the context, and William knew that a document could be interpreted differently depending on who had prepared it, who had approved it, and what problem it had been designed to solve. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had William's team been excluded? Why had decisions affecting Catherine and the children been discussed without direct consultation? A senior advisor warned that the language might simply reflect an attempt to protect King Charles from unnecessary pressure. William listened. Then he turned to the final paragraph. There, one sentence referred to preparing the public for the next phase of royal leadership. The wording was vague, but the implication was not. Someone inside the palace had been discussing how William and Catherine should be presented before the succession had even occurred. And when William read the next line aloud, the room became completely silent. The sentence did not accuse William of wrongdoing. It did something more subtle. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, the memorandum suggested that public confidence in the next reign should be carefully managed to avoid premature concentration around the Wales household. For several seconds, no one spoke. The language was polished, strategic, almost harmless on the surface. But William understood what it implied. His growing role should be controlled. Catherine's public influence should be limited. And the future monarchy should be presented in a way that protected the current palace structure from becoming overshadowed too soon. One advisor argued that the wording was not hostile. It might simply have reflected concern about maintaining stability during King Charles's reign. Another pointed out that Catherine's popularity had often drawn enormous attention, sometimes overwhelming the events she attended. William rejected that explanation. He was not objecting to coordination. He was objecting to decisions being made about his family without his involvement, and urged caution. A badly worded sentence was not proof of a campaign. But she also admitted that the memorandum raised serious questions about authority. Who had requested the strategy? Who approved the language? And why had the Prince of Wales been kept outside discussions about the next reign? William closed the folder. For the first time that evening, his frustration became visible. He said he had spent years avoiding confrontation to protect his father. He had accepted difficult compromises. He had ignored private slights. But this was no longer about preserving harmony. It was about whether he could trust the people shaping the future of his family. Then William said 6 words no one in the room expected. "She no longer has my trust." The statement changed everything. Until that moment, the meeting had been about documents and palace procedure. Now it was about Camilla herself. But before the advisors could respond, a message arrived from her office. Camilla had learned about the meeting. She knew William had brought the folder, and her response was immediate. Camilla did not wait for the meeting to end. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, she sent word that she wanted to enter the room and respond to the accusations directly. Her message was blunt. She had not approved any attempt to weaken William. She had not authorized a campaign against Catherine, and she would not allow palace advisors to turn routine planning into evidence of betrayal. Camilla believed she had been deliberately excluded. From her perspective, William had gathered senior figures, produced documents connected to her office, and questioned her influence without first asking for an explanation. Her advisors insisted that the memorandum had been created to protect continuity around King Charles. They argued that coordinated messaging was necessary during a sensitive period. Too many competing offices, they said, could create confusion. Too many public narratives could make the monarchy appear divided. Camilla reportedly believed William was reading personal hostility into administrative language. She accused unnamed palace insiders of encouraging the conflict. Someone, she claimed, had selected the most damaging lines, removed their context, and placed them in William's hands knowing exactly how he would react. Princess and supported allowing Camilla to speak, whatever the documents appeared to show, and did not believe a decision should be made while one side remained outside the room. William agreed, but under strict conditions. The discussion would remain private. No one would raise their voice, and every claim would be answered directly. Moments later, the door opened. Camilla entered without her usual public composure. She looked first at Anne, then at William. Finally, her attention moved to the sealed folder on the table. She did not deny that the memorandum existed. She did not claim the messages were fabricated. Instead, she asked one question: "Who gave you those documents?" And in that moment, William realized Camilla was not only defending herself. She was searching for someone inside the palace she believed had betrayed her. William did not answer Camilla's question immediately. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, he believed the identity of the source mattered, but not more than the contents of the documents themselves. He pushed the folder across the table. Then he asked Camilla whether her office had supported a system that allowed decisions about the Wales family to be discussed without his approval. Camilla rejected the accusation. She said the palace had been dealing with increasing pressure around King Charles, public expectations, and the future division of royal duties. Someone had to coordinate the competing offices. Someone had to prevent conflicting messages. And someone had to protect Charles from being overwhelmed by every disagreement inside the family. William remained controlled. He did not accuse her of trying to seize the throne. He did not claim she had acted alone. He asked one direct question after another. Why had his team been bypassed? Why had Catherine's role been discussed without her knowledge? Why had plans involving George, Charlotte, and Louis moved forward before their parents approved them? Camilla replied that urgent decisions sometimes required speed. She argued that William's office had become increasingly protective and difficult to coordinate with. Then Catherine's name entered the argument. Camilla suggested that the intense public focus surrounding Catherine had complicated palace strategy. William's expression hardened. He said Catherine's popularity was not a problem to be managed, and intervened before the exchange became personal. She reminded them that the meeting was about authority, not old resentments. For a moment, the room settled. Then William returned to the memorandum and asked the question that mattered most. Had Camilla ever approved withholding information from him and Catherine? Camilla paused. It was only a few seconds, but everyone noticed. Then she admitted that, on one occasion, she had supported keeping a sensitive palace decision away from the Wales office until Charles had been fully briefed. She insisted it had been done to protect the king. But the admission weakened her entire defense. because William was no longer arguing about interpretation. He was looking at proof that information affecting his family had deliberately been withheld. The room changed after Camilla's admission. Until that moment, every disagreement could still be blamed on wording, interpretation, or overprotective advisors. Now there was something concrete. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, Camilla acknowledged that she had supported withholding a sensitive palace decision from William and Catherine until King Charles had been fully briefed. She insisted the motive had not been hostile. Charles had been under intense pressure. His advisors feared that another internal disagreement would increase his stress. Camilla believed the information should reach him first, privately and without challenge, before the Wales household became involved. To her, it had been protection. To William, it was a breach of trust. He asked how many other decisions had been delayed, filtered, or redirected in the same way. Camilla replied that this had been an exceptional case. William was not convinced. The argument was no longer about one memorandum. It was about a system in which information affecting his family could be controlled by people outside his office. Princess and could see the legitimacy on both sides. Camilla had spent years protecting Charles from pressure. William had a constitutional and parental responsibility to know when decisions affected his household. But secrecy had turned both intentions into suspicion. The advisors began worrying about another danger. If even part of the confrontation leaked, the public would not describe it as a dispute over palace procedure. They would call it a power struggle. Some would claim Camilla had been removed. Others would use the word expelled. No such constitutional action had occurred. Her title remained unchanged. Her marriage remained intact. And no formal decision had been announced. But inside the room, William made clear that he was not demanding a theatrical punishment. He wanted something quieter, more precise, and potentially far more damaging to Camilla's influence. He wanted formal limits placed on what her office could decide without his approval. William's demand was not that Camilla be stripped of her title. He did not ask for a public humiliation. And according to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, he did not call for her to be removed from the royal family. What he wanted was a formal boundary. William insisted that Camilla's office should no longer have authority over appearances involving Catherine, George, Charlotte, or Louis. Any decision affecting the Wales household would require direct approval from William and Catherine. Private communications could no longer be filtered through competing palace teams. And any strategy involving the future reign would have to include William's office from the beginning. To William, these were basic protections. To Camilla, they sounded like a public vote of no confidence. She argued that removing her influence from internal planning would send a message to every advisor in the palace. It would suggest that she could not be trusted. It would weaken her position beside Charles. And once such a restriction became visible, the press would interpret it as punishment, and disagreed. She described the proposal as a reset. The monarchy, she argued, could not function when multiple households believed they had overlapping authority. Clear boundaries might prevent a much larger crisis later. William then added one final condition. No member of the royal family should ever learn about a decision affecting their children through a secondary office. That line ended the debate. Camilla understood that William was no longer negotiating over wording. He was protecting his family and his future role. But the final decision did not belong to him. It did not belong to Anne. And it did not belong to Camilla. It belonged to King Charles. Because only Charles could decide whether supporting his wife meant rejecting his son's demands, or whether preserving the monarchy required limiting Camilla's influence. King Charles received two completely different versions of the same confrontation. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, Camilla described the meeting as an ambush built around documents taken out of context. William described it as the first honest discussion the palace had allowed in years. Charles listened to both, and for the first time, the conflict stopped being about memorandums, schedules, or competing offices. It became personal. Camilla had supported him through years of public pressure, criticism, and uncertainty. William was his son, the Prince of Wales, and the man who would one day inherit responsibility for the monarchy. Supporting one side, too, openly risked humiliating the other. Charles did not want to weaken Camilla, but he also understood that William could not prepare for the future while decisions about his family were being made without him. Princess Anne urged Charles to separate two roles that had become dangerously entangled. Camilla was his wife, but palace governance could not be treated as an extension of marriage. William was his son, but constitutional responsibility could not be reduced to family loyalty. Charles delayed his decision. He asked for the documents to be reviewed again. He requested separate accounts from senior advisors, and he refused to approve any public statement that suggested Camilla had been expelled, removed, or stripped of status. The delay frustrated both sides. William feared the palace would bury the issue. Camilla feared the review itself had already damaged her authority. Then Charles issued one private instruction. Camilla would continue her public role. William would receive direct control over decisions involving the Wales household, and would oversee the transition between the two offices. Both sides interpreted the instruction as a victory, but neither understood what Charles had quietly removed from Camilla's control. Charles's instruction sounded like a compromise, but inside the palace, its consequences were immediate. According to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, Camilla retained her title, her public position, and her place beside the king. She had not been expelled. She had not been removed from the royal family, and no constitutional action had been taken against her. But selected internal powers were quietly restricted. Her office would no longer control decisions involving the Wales household. William and Catherine would receive direct authority over appearances involving George, Charlotte, and Louis. Future succession messaging would require William's involvement, and Princess Anne would supervise communication between the competing palace teams until trust could be rebuilt. To the public, almost none of this was visible. There was no dramatic announcement, no official punishment, only subtle changes. One of Camilla's appearances was postponed. A briefing previously handled by her office was transferred elsewhere, and William's team began issuing family decisions without passing them through the same internal channels. Those changes were enough to start rumors. Some claimed Camilla had been pushed aside. Others described the move as a palace coup. The most sensational voices used the word expelled, but that word was not accurate. What had changed was not her membership in the family. It was her influence over specific decisions. Camilla understood the distinction. She also understood how damaging it could become if the public began noticing it. Then she requested a final private conversation with William. No advisors, no documents, no and between them. What she said in that room made one thing clear. The compromise had prevented a public rupture. It had not repaired the trust behind palace walls. The final conversation was quieter than the confrontation that had come before it. No advisors were present. No folders lay open on the table. And according to this clearly fictional and dramatized royal narrative, neither William nor Camilla raised their voice. Camilla made one thing clear from the beginning. She would not accept being portrayed as an enemy of the future monarchy. She insisted that every decision she had supported had been intended to protect Charles, preserve stability, and prevent the palace from appearing divided. William listened. Then he gave her his final answer. Protecting the monarchy, he said, could never mean excluding the people expected to carry it forward. He would not allow decisions involving Catherine or the children to be made through another office. He would not accept private strategies about the next reign being shaped without his involvement. And he would not remain silent simply to avoid uncomfortable headlines. Camilla did not apologize, but she acknowledged that the old system could no longer continue. Charles later asked both sides to maintain public unity. The titles remained unchanged. The marriage remained intact, and no verified expulsion had taken place. Yet behind the scenes, the balance of influence had shifted. William now held greater control over his family's role and stood between the competing offices. and Camilla's authority had become more clearly defined than before. The palace had avoided a public fracture, but trust inside the family had already changed. Was William right to challenge Camilla's influence, or did he push the conflict too far? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Royal Latest Report for more royal commentary and clearly dramatized palace narratives. Because Camilla's next public appearance may reveal whether this compromise restored order or marked the beginning of a permanent royal divide.